The collision alarm echoed through the narrow corridors of Aurora 7 station exactly at 0417 UTC. Commander John Miller woke before the automated protocol even flooded his compartment with pulsating red light. 23 years in space had trained his brain to distinguish between the 15 different types of alerts an orbital station could emit. This was the worst. He floated to the wall console, his fingers dancing over the holograms as he pulled telemetry data. What he saw made his stomach clench in a way that zero gravity never could. Commander to Ops Center, all department heads, code red, this is not a drill. Miller propelled himself through the access tubes, his mind processing impossible numbers. Aurora 7 had been orbiting Kepler 442b for 16 months, humanity's first permanent station outside the solar system. There were only 42 souls, scientists and engineers, building the bridge between humanity and the stars. And now, something from the void was about to turn them into debris. The Ops Center was already buzzing when he burst through the hatch. Dr. Sarah Chen was hunched over the sensor station, her face illuminated by the cascading data. Chief Engineer Dmitry Volkov was gesticulating furiously at 3 technicians, his harsh voice cutting through the hum of the systems. "Report," Miller ordered, securing himself to the central bar. Chen didn't take her eyes off the screens. Massive object approaching, relative speed of 3.7 kilometers per second, estimated impact in 22 minutes. Size? Approximately 2 kilometers long. She finally looked at him, and Miller saw something that rarely appeared on the astrophysicist's face: absolute fear. "Commander, it's not an asteroid." Miller felt the air escape his lungs. "Show me." The central holographic projection expanded, dominating the center of the room. There, magnified thousands of times, was something that shouldn't exist. The shape was vaguely cylindrical, but its surface reflected light in ways that defied Newtonian physics. Impossible geometric patterns rippled across the outer hull, as if the structure itself existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. "It's a ship," Volkov murmured, his voice laden with awe and terror. "An alien ship." The silence that followed was broken only by the constant beep of the monitoring systems. 42 humans, 350 light-years from Earth, had just received confirmation that they were not alone in the universe. And that confirmation was about to obliterate them. Miller forced his mind to work. "Communication, attempts? All frequencies, all protocols," Chen replied, "including the universal mathematical patterns of the SETI protocol. Absolute silence." "Propulsion?" "No detectable thermal signature, no radiation emission. It's just gliding, as if the vacuum offered no resistance." Miller accessed his personal console, fingers flying over controls. "Station thruster status?" Volkov shook his head. "Insufficient. Even burning everything we have, we'd only be able to alter our orbit by a few kilometers. Not enough." "Emergency pods?" 8 functional, capacity for 5 people each. The brutal math hung in the air like a ghost. 40 seats for 42 people. Miller looked around the Ops Center. Young, bright faces, the sharpest minds humanity could offer. All stared at him, expecting him to perform the impossible miracle that commanders always performed in movies. "Commander," Chen's voice was strangely calm. "There's something else." She manipulated the controls, and a series of graphs replaced the ship's image. "When I increased the sensitivity of the gravitational sensors, I detected this. The ship isn't just moving through space. It's distorting it. Miller leaned forward, studying the ripples in the space-time fabric around the object. Warp field distortion? Not exactly. It's more subtle, as if the ship were surfing space-time, micro-warps. Constant adjustments, thousands per second to maintain momentum without conventional propulsion. That's theoretically impossible, Volkov whispered. Apparently not. Chen zoomed in on a segment of the data. But here's the most interesting part. The distortion patterns aren't random. There's a mathematical regularity, a sequence. Miller felt something shift in his perception. Are you saying it's a language? I'm saying it could be. The variations in the gravitational ripples follow a progression that repeats every 47 seconds. Primes, then Fibonacci, then… She hesitated. Then something I don't recognize. Miller's mind raced. His entire career had been built on one fundamental principle. When confronted with the impossible, look for the pattern. If they're transmitting a mathematical sequence through spatial distortion, then they know we're here, and they want us to know that they know. Or, Volkov interjected, his voice grave, it's just the side effect of a technology we haven't even begun to comprehend, and we're going to die trying to find messages in static noise. Miller checked the timer. 19 minutes. Dr. Chen, I need you to isolate that sequence, every variation, every repetition. Look for anything that could be an expected response. Commander, with all due respect, one of the younger technicians spoke, his voice trembling. Shouldn't we be evacuating? It was the question everyone wanted to ask. Miller met the young man's eyes. And let 42 years of research be destroyed. Let the only physical proof of alien technology shatter without even trying to understand. He paused. Prepare the pods, but no one enters them until my order. As long as there's time, there's hope. The next 10 minutes were a chaotic ballet of activity. Chen and her team isolated over 200 distinct patterns in the gravitational distortions. Volkov diverted energy from non-essential systems to amplify the station's transmitters, sending mathematical responses in all directions. The rest of the crew prepared evacuation protocols, packing critical data onto portable drives. Miller floated at the center of the chaos, his mind working in overdrive. There was something he was missing, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything clear. The ship hadn't slowed down. It hadn't made any attempt to adjust course. It was on a collision course, yet transmitting complex mathematical sequences. 8 minutes, Chen announced, her voice steady despite the tension. Commander, Volkov approached, his expression grim. If we're going to evacuate, it needs to be now. The pods need at least 4 minutes to reach a safe distance. Miller nodded slowly. It was time to accept defeat. He opened the general channel. Attention all crew. Initiating emergency evacuation protocol. Proceed to the… Wait! Chen practically screamed. Commander, wait! Everyone froze. Chen was typing frantically, multiple screens opening around her. The sequence I didn't recognize. I was approaching it wrong. It's not pure math. It's coordinates. Coordinates of what? Our exact position relative to the galactic center. And then, her fingers paused, coordinates of 27 other star systems. Miller felt a chill run down his spine. Show me. The central hologram reconstructed itself, showing a 3-dimensional map of the Milky Way's local spiral arm. 28 points glowed red, including Kepler 442. All these systems, Chen whispered, all have exoplanets in the habitable zone, and all have been identified by humanity as priority targets for colonization. The silence was deafening. Miller felt the weight of understanding crush any other concern. They know who we are, they know what we want, and they're showing us they got here first. 5 minutes, the station computer's mechanical voice announced. Volkov grabbed Miller's arm. Commander, no matter what it means, we have to go. But Miller wasn't listening. His mind had made the final connection. The sequence repeats every 47 seconds, right? Yes, but... And how long have we been transmitting back? Chen checked quickly. 11 minutes. So they received our responses, and they haven't changed course. Miller turned to face her. Dr. Chen, what if collision isn't the objective? What do you mean? 3.7 kilometers per second. It's fast enough to be threatening, but slow enough to... He paused, processing, to be noticed, to force a response. They wanted to see how we would react. That's insane, Volkov protested. You're betting 42 lives on a theory. It's not a theory. Miller pointed to the hologram. Look at the approach angle. They're not coming directly at us. They're coming from a vector that will take them tangent to our orbit. Chen re-ran the calculations, her eyes widening. He's right. If they maintain speed and course, they'll pass within 100 kilometers. Close enough to be alarming, but not a collision. Miller finished. It's a test. They want to see if we panic and flee, or if we stay and try to communicate. 3 minutes. Miller made the hardest decision of his life. Cancel evacuation. Everyone remain at your stations. The ops center erupted in protests. Volkov was red-faced. You can't? I can, and I am. Miller faced his friend. Dmitri, if I'm wrong, we all die. But if I'm right, and we evacuate, we lose the only chance humanity might have to make first contact on our terms, to show that we are not a species that runs from the first shadow. What if you're wrong? Miller smiled, a tired, sad smile. Then at least we'll die trying something impressive. Volkov held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're crazy, American. Stubborn Russian. The next 2 minutes were the longest in Miller's life. The crew watched, some praying, others simply staring at the approaching death. The alien ship grew in the external view, its impossible structure filling the screens. 100 kilometers. 50. 20. Miller gripped the central bar, hard enough to whiten his knuckles. If he was wrong, he wouldn't feel a thing. Death would be instantaneous. 10 kilometers. 5. The ship passed. For a moment, Aurora 7 was bathed in light that shouldn't exist. Colors that had no name in any human language. Every screen, every system, every piece of technology on the station flickered and reset simultaneously. And then, silence. Chen was the first to find her voice. It's slowing down. Miller looked at the reconstructed hologram. The alien ship had drastically reduced its speed, entering an orbit parallel to theirs. Not threatening, not distant, just waiting. Receiving transmission, Chen announced, her voice trembling. Broadband, all frequencies. It's what? She turned to him, tears floating in zero gravity. It's our own transmission. They're repeating our messages back to us. Word for word, number for number. Miller felt something expand in his chest, a mix of triumph and terror and absolute awe. They understood. Volkov floated beside him, his hand firm on the commander's shoulder. What do we do now? Miller looked at the alien ship, at the impossibility made real, suspended in the vacuum. He thought of all human history, of all the wars fought for territory and resources, of all the dreamers who looked at the stars and wondered. Now, he said softly, now we try not to mess it up. The alien ship remained in parallel orbit for 48 hours. No additional movement, no new transmissions beyond the continuous repetition of the mathematical messages Aurora 7 had sent. It was as if it were waiting for something specific, and Miller feared he didn't know exactly what. The ops center had transformed into a hive of coordinated activity. Rotating teams worked 6-hour shifts, analyzing every fragment of data about the visiting ship. Dr. Chen led the communication effort, building progressively more complex sequences. Volkov coordinated the engineering team, trying to understand the impossible propulsion technology. And Miller, sleep-deprived and fueled by synthetic coffee and pure adrenaline, orchestrated everything. Commander, you need to rest. Chen insisted for the third time in 8 hours. You won't be any good to us if you collapse. I can rest when they leave, or when we're dead. Miller took another sip of the bitter black drink. Any progress on decoding the light patterns? Chen sighed, acknowledging defeat. Little. When they passed us, the sensors picked up emissions at wavelengths our technology can barely detect. It's like trying to listen to a symphony when you can only perceive 3 notes. But did we pick up anything? Pulses, regular, like Morse code, but infinitely more complex. She brought up a 3-dimensional graph. My team is trying to correlate with known linguistic patterns, but honestly, it's like trying to teach Latin to someone who's never seen an alphabet. Miller studied the data, looking for anything that made sense. His emergency communications training hadn't exactly included a course on first contact protocol. What if we're thinking about this wrong? Math worked to get their attention, but maybe it's not enough for real conversation. What do you suggest? Sending emojis? The question was sarcastic, but Miller paused. Actually, Chen stared at him. You can't be serious. Not emojis exactly, but visual symbols. Pictograms. That's how humans communicated before complex written language. Cave, drawings, universal concepts. Sun, moon, water, fire. Commander, they have technology to bend space-time. Do you really think they'll be impressed by stick figures? It's not about impressing them. Miller floated to the main console. It's about establishing intent. Math proves intelligence, but art, symbols, visual representation of abstract ideas, that demonstrates culture, conceptual thought. It's the leap from there's intelligence here to there's a civilization here. Chen considered this, biting her lip. It's completely unorthodox. This entire protocol is unorthodox. We're inventing it as we go. All right. Chen started typing. I'll need Volkov's help to build a suitable image, transmitter, and someone who knows art. Do we have someone like that? Dr. Nakamura, astrobiologist. He did scientific illustration before joining the mission. Perfect. Assemble a team. I want a visual library of basic concepts ready in 6 hours. As Chen hurried out, Volkov appeared through the opposite hatch, his expression grim. Commander, we have a problem. Miller felt his stomach clench. After 48 hours of tension, the word problem had taken on a new and terrible weight. What kind of problem? Political kind. Volkov lowered his voice. We've received encrypted transmission from Earth. Mission Control is aware of the situation, and they're not happy. They can't be expecting us to just ignore an alien ship. No, they're ordering extreme caution, zero-contact initiatives beyond passive responses, and… Volkov hesitated. They're dispatching the Rapid Response Fleet. 6 military ships, ETA, 14 months, via orbital transfer routes. Miller felt his blood run cold. They're sending a military force for first contact? Officially, it's an armed, diplomatic escort. Volkov's tone made it clear what he thought of that description. Unofficially, they're terrified. And terrified, people make stupid choices. 14 months. Enough time to completely mess up any relationship we build here. Assuming we build any… Volkov crossed his arms. Commander, you need to understand their position. We're 42 civilians on a research station. If this ship decides to be hostile, we have absolutely nothing that can stop it. Mission Control is following threat containment protocols. Protocols written for asteroids and system failures, not for starfaring civilizations. Miller rubbed his tired eyes. Did you respond to the transmission? Not yet. I needed your authorization first. Good. Don't respond. Volkov blinked. Excuse me? If we respond, they'll want constant reports. They'll want approval for every move. And when they find out I'm taking active communication initiatives, they'll replace me. Miller met the engineer's eyes. Dmitri, this is humanity's opportunity. We can't waste it on bureaucracy and fear. You're talking about ignoring direct orders from Mission Control. I'm talking about exercising command autonomy in an unprecedented situation. That's why they put me here, to make decisions when the light-speed communication delay makes orders from Earth obsolete before they even arrive. Volkov studied him for a long moment. You know this could end your career. If this works, there won't be careers as we know them. There will be something bigger. Miller smiled faintly. And if it doesn't work, well, there won't be anyone to fire me. You're completely insane. But Volkov was smiling. All right, we ignore the transmission. But when the military fleet arrives and they want to know why, I'm pointing at you. Fair enough. The next 6 hours were an exercise in frenetic creativity. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, a short 50-year-old man with surprisingly steady hands in zero gravity, worked with Chen to create an image library. They started with the absolute basics, stylized representations of atoms, water molecules, the solar system, Aurora 7 station itself. The trick, Nakamura explained as he refined a drawing of a human figure, is to find the balance between abstraction and detail. Too abstract and it loses meaning, too detailed and it becomes culturally specific. Miller watched over his shoulder, fascinated by the process. How do you decide what to include? I think about what would be universal. Geometric shapes exist independently of culture. The golden ratio appears in nature everywhere. Representations of planetary orbits follow fundamental physics. He added shading to an image of Earth. And some concepts are simply human, like choosing to show our planet as a blue and green circle. It's simultaneously factual and emotional. Emotional? It shows that we care about our appearance, that beauty means something to us. Nakamura stepped back, examining his work. I don't know if aliens understand aesthetics, but if they do, This communicates something that math cannot. When the library was ready, Chen integrated it into Volkov's modified transmission system. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Transmit the sequence of images across multiple electromagnetic spectra, starting slowly and gradually increasing complexity. Ready? Miller asked, his hand over the transmission control. Around the ops center, heads nodded. Chen checked the systems one last time. Volkov crossed his fingers in a superstition Miller didn't know the engineer possessed. Nakamura simply watched, his face serene. Miller activated the transmission. The images flowed across the distance between the ships at light speed, 7 seconds of delay. A circle representing the sun, 8 smaller circles representing planets, a dot identifying Kepler 442, a shape representing Aurora 7. And then finally, Nakamura's stylized human figure, arms outstretched in the classic Vitruvian man. "Now we wait," Chen murmured. They didn't have to wait long. 43 seconds after the transmission, the alien ship lit up. Not metaphorically, it literally lit up. Its impossible surface pulsating, with light that made eyes ache. Aurora 7's sensors went wild, detecting emissions across virtually every known spectrum and several that weren't. "We're receiving a response," Chen practically shouted. "It's... Commander, I can't process this. It's too much information, too fast. Scale it down to something we can analyze." "I'm trying, but it's like trying to drink from a fire hose." Her fingers flew over controls. "Wait, I'm getting something. They're transmitting our images back, but modified." The central hologram reconstructed the alien transmission. There was the circle representing the sun, but now surrounded by dozens of other, smaller circles. Not just planets, Miller realized, but star systems, a representation of a portion of the galaxy. The next image showed Nakamura's human figure, but it wasn't alone. Beside it were 3 other forms. One was vaguely insectoid, all angles and quadruple symmetry. Another appeared fluid, without fixed structure. The third was something Miller's mind struggled to process, a geometry that suggested extra dimensions. "They're showing other species," Nakamura whispered with reverence. "We are not alone, and they are not alone." "It's a galactic community," Chen added, her voice trembling. "They're not solitary explorers, they're representatives." The transmission continued. Images of impossible structures, transformed worlds, energy being manipulated in ways that defied comprehension. And then, something that made Miller straighten up. It was a temporal sequence. The human figure appeared small, primitive. The other 3 forms appeared larger, more developed. But there was an arrow pointing forward, to a future point, where all 4 forms were the same size. "They're saying we're young," Miller murmured, "underdeveloped, but with potential." "Or," Volkov countered, "they're saying we need to grow up before they can take us seriously." "Perhaps both." Miller made a decision. "Prepare a new transmission. I want to show them exactly how capable we are." In the following hours, Nakamura's team created something extraordinary. Not just static symbols, but a visual narrative. They showed human history condensed into elegant images. Primitive figures looking at the stars, tools being created, fire being mastered, agriculture, cities, and then the crucial leap, rockets, the arrival on the moon, the construction of orbital stations, Aurora 7 at Kepler 442. But more importantly, They showed something no math could communicate: cooperation. Images of multiple human figures working together, raising structures, saving each other, exploring side by side. It was a simple message: humans were stronger, united. The transmission was sent. This time, the response took longer. 4 minutes of tense silence. When it came, it was unlike anything before. The alien ship began to move, not away, but closer. It glided through the vacuum with that impossible grace until it was just 5 kilometers away. Close enough for details of its surface to become visible on the external cameras. And then part of its outer hull simply opened. "Commander." Chen's voice was strangely calm. That calm that comes when the brain is processing something too big for panic. "There's something coming out of the ship." Miller focused the cameras. There, emerging from the opening in the alien structure, was a pod. Small compared to the mothership, but still the size of a station cargo module. It moved smoothly across the distance between the ships, clearly directed at Aurora 7. "They're sending us something," Volkov said, already in motion. "We need to prepare the quarantine protocols. If there's any kind of pathogen—" "Wait." Miller raised his hand. "Look at the approach pattern. They're slowing down much earlier than necessary, making their movements obvious, predictable, so as not to scare us," Chen completed. "Like you would slowly extend your hand so as not to alarm a nervous animal." "Exactly." Miller took a deep breath. "Volkov, prepare Cargo Bay 3. Full quarantine protocols, but no weapons. Nothing that could be interpreted as hostility." "You want to let that thing into the station?" "They crossed interstellar vacuum to get here. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done it 2 days ago." Miller faced his friend. "This is first contact, Dmitri. Real, official, historic. And the first thing we do cannot be to show fear." Volkov held his gaze, then nodded sharply. "Your funeral." The pod docked in Cargo Bay 20 minutes. Later, the entire station was on high alert. All hatches sealed, all cameras focused on the alien structure. Miller, Chen, Volkov, and Nakamura watched from an adjacent control room, separated from the bay only by reinforced glass, and the hope that they were doing the right thing. "Atmospheric readings?" Miller asked. "The pod is sealed," Chen reported. "No gas leaks. External temperature consistent with vacuum." "Wait, there's movement." The side of the pod slid open, revealing an interior illuminated by that impossible light. And there, perfectly visible, was an object. It wasn't a life form, it was a box. Simple, geometric, made of a material that glowed softly, and beside it, projected onto the inner wall of the pod, was a hologram. It was Nakamura's human figure, perfectly reproduced, and beside it, a symbol that even a child would recognize. A hand extended in greeting. Miller felt emotion rise in his throat. They understood. Not just the images. They understood the intent. "What do we do?" Nakamura asked softly. Miller was already in motion, leaving the control room. "We do what humans have always done when they meet strangers who extend a hand. We reciprocate." "Commander, wait!" Volkov shouted. "We need protocols, scans, analyses." "We don't have time for fear." Miller stopped at the hatch to the bay. "Either they trust us or they don't. We need to trust them too." He sealed his spacesuit, checked the systems, and floated into the cargo bay. The alien pod was just 10 meters away, its light bathing everything in hues that had no name. Miller moved slowly, his movements deliberate and clear. When he reached the box, he extended his hands and picked it up. It was surprisingly light and warm to the touch, even through his suit gloves. The surface had texture, but it wasn't rough or smooth. It was something in between, something that suggested life. Miller turned to the cameras and lifted the box, showing it to his crewmates and the alien pod. A simple gesture. "We receive your gift." The response was immediate. The light inside the pod pulsed once, bright and definitive. And then the pod retracted, sliding smoothly back into the mothership. Miller returned to the control room, the alien box secure in his hands. When he placed it on the analysis table, everyone simply stared at it for a long moment. "So," Chen finally said, "does anyone want to open the alien Pandora's box, or do we just sit here staring at it until the military fleet arrives?" Despite the tension, Miller chuckled. "Let's see what our new friends want to show us." The box remained on the analysis table for 3 hours while every sensor available on Aurora 7 was directed at it. Mass spectrometers, magnetic resonance scanners, radiation detectors, chemical analyzers. All returned results that varied between the incomprehensible and the impossible. "The material of the outer casing isn't in any database," Chen reported, her frustration evident. "The molecular structure is stable, but the atoms don't behave as they should. It's as if they're aware of being observed." "That's physically impossible," Volkov murmured, but his conviction was weak. Impossible had lost much of its meaning in the last 72 hours. Miller circled the table, observing the box from all angles. It was too perfect to be natural, yet too organic to be merely manufactured. Radiation? None above normal cosmic background. In fact, it's slightly below, as if it were absorbing ambient radiation. Temperature? Exactly 22 degrees Celsius. No matter what we do to cool or heat it, it returns to that temperature in seconds. Miller leaned closer. The box's surface reflected his face in strange ways, as if multiple versions of him were looking back from slightly different angles. Is there some kind of opening mechanism? Nakamura, who had remained silent during the analysis, finally spoke. "I don't think it's that kind of box." Everyone turned to him. The astrobiologist was looking at the box with a peculiar expression, half wonder, half apprehension. During my doctoral research, I studied interspecies communication on Earth, dolphins, crows, octopuses, and one thing I learned is that a true gift doesn't come with instructions. It comes with trust. "Are you suggesting we just touch it?" Chen looked horrified. "I'm suggesting they wouldn't send us something dangerous, not after all the work to establish peaceful communication." Nakamura slowly reached out his hand. "They want to see if we trust them." "Wait." Volkov grabbed his wrist. "What if it's a different test? What if it's to see if we're stupid enough to touch unknown technology?" "Then we've already failed," Miller interjected. "Because I already touched it when I brought it into the station." He looked at Nakamura. "But this time, we do it together." The two men reached for the box simultaneously. The moment their hands made contact with the surface, the world changed. It wasn't violent. It wasn't disorienting. It was like falling into a dream. Except Miller was fully aware that he was awake. The ops center disappeared, replaced by something his mind struggled to process as physical space. He was suspended in a void that wasn't empty. Around him, structures of light and impossible geometry formed and dissolved into patterns that suggested meaning without being exactly symbolic. And there, right in front of him, was a presence. It had no definite physical form. Sometimes it resembled the insectoid figure from the transmissions. Other times, it was an energy pattern. But always, consistently, there was a sense of ancient consciousness observing him. Do not be afraid. The voice was not sound. It was pure concept, direct impression into his mind. I am translating into forms you can process. Miller tried to speak and found that he could, though he had no mouth in this place. Where am I? Cognitive interface, an intermediate space between your consciousness and mine. The box is merely a conduit. The presence shifted, momentarily becoming more humanoid, as if trying to make him comfortable. Your people would call me an ambassador. Ambassador of what? Of the collective, a union of species that have achieved sufficient understanding of the universe to begin to see it as it truly is. The presence gestured, and images bloomed around them. Countless worlds, species beyond number, structures that would make Niven's ring world look like a child's toy. There are 3,400,000 member species currently. You will be invited to become the 3,401,000th. Miller felt dizzy with the scale. Why us? We are so primitive compared to you. Primitive is relative. You have mastered interstellar travel, established a permanent presence beyond your home system. These are the minimum milestones. The presence shifted again, and Miller felt something that could be the alien equivalent of a smile. But that is not why we pay special attention. Then why? Because you are survivors. New images appeared. Earth, but not as Miller knew it. He saw cities in flames, oceans rising, the metal brains of artificial intelligences warring with biology. He saw disasters that had driven other civilizations to extinction. Asteroids, pandemics, nuclear wars, ecological collapse. Earth had faced all of this at some point in its history. Most species do not survive technological adolescence. The presence explained, they destroy themselves before reaching the stars. Of the 100,000 species that achieve space travel, only 1 in 1,000 survives long enough for first contact with the collective. We barely survived, Miller admitted, remembering stories about the 21st century. We still might not survive, but you keep trying. That is the point. The presence moved closer, and Miller felt the weight of eons of experience in that eyeless gaze. Resilience, adaptability, refusal to give up, even when logic dictates surrender. These are rare qualities, valuable qualities. Are you saying you want us in the collective because we're stubborn? I am saying that you have something many advanced species lost on the path to technological enlightenment. You still care about individuals. You still risk everything for abstract ideals like hope and dignity. The presence made another gesture, and Miller saw himself. Not now, but during the collision alarm, he saw his decision not to evacuate. Your commander gambled 42 lives on the possibility of connection rather than the certainty of survival. That is remarkable. Miller felt his face flush, grateful that in this strange space no one could see. It was almost stupidity. The line between bravery and stupidity is drawn only in retrospect. You chose connection over safety. You chose to trust over fear. These choices define your species more than any technology. So what happens now? You give us magic technology and make us members? No. The firmness in the answer surprised Miller. Admission to the collective is not a gift. It is an achievement. You must prove you can use knowledge responsibly. How? The presence expanded, and suddenly Miller was seeing through eyes that were not his own. He saw Aurora 7 from outside, saw the alien ship in parallel orbit. But he also saw something else. 6 points of light, slowly approaching through interstellar vacuum. Earth's military fleet. Your species is divided. Part of you looks at the stars with curiosity. Part looks with fear. When this fleet arrives, there will be choices. The image is changed, showing possible futures. In one, the military ships opened fire on the alien ship. In another, diplomats tensely negotiated through sterile rooms and quarantine protocols. In a third, humans and aliens worked side by side on grand projects. What your species becomes depends on which future you choose. Are you saying you will judge us based on how we handle the fleet's arrival? I am saying that you will judge yourselves. The collective merely observes. The presence began to dissipate. The box contains knowledge, not technology but understanding. Access to the collective archive of 3 million species of accumulated wisdom. Use it well. Wait! Miller reached out, trying to grasp the fading presence. How much time do we have? When do you leave? We are not leaving. We will remain in orbit until the fleet arrives. We want to see how your species handles the convergence of curiosity and fear, progress, and conservation. The voice was growing weaker. Commander Miller, you made the first right choice. Make sure your species makes the second. The void flickered, and suddenly Miller was back in the ops center, his hand still on the box. Nakamura was beside him, tears silently rolling down his face. Around them, Chen and Volkov were frozen in shock. How long? Miller managed to ask. Chen checked her console, her voice trembling. You two were touching the box for less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds. But Miller was sure he had spent at least 15 minutes in that intermediate space. Did you see anything? The box lit up. You two stopped moving. And then... Chen gestured helplessly. Then you came back. Nakamura finally found his voice. There was so much information, so much history, worlds beyond counting, each with their own struggles, their own triumphs. He looked at Miller with reverence. We are not alone. We never were. And they want us, Miller added, but only if we prove we deserve it. Volkov crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. Let me guess. We need to prove we won't blow up the first alien thing we see? Essentially, Miller stepped away from the box, his mind still processing. They'll stay until the military fleet arrives. They want to see how we handle the situation. This is an assessment, Chen said slowly. They are testing us. Not just us, all of humanity. Miller began pacing, his command mode activating. When this fleet arrives, there will be tension. Military commanders confronting alien technology, security protocols, threat analysis, and in the midst of it all, a ship that could effortlessly destroy us remaining calmly in orbit. You're worried they'll shoot first and ask questions later, Volkov said. I'm worried someone will panic. A sensor showing a false positive, an overly nervous officer, a misunderstanding of intentions, and suddenly first contact becomes first conflict. So what do we do? Miller stopped, looking out the observation window at the alien ship suspended in the vacuum. We do what humans do best. We build bridges. In the following hours, Aurora 7 transformed into a laboratory of interspecies understanding. Nakamura's team began systematically documenting interactions with the archive, discovering that different people experience the interface in different ways. Chen saw equations and physical theories. Volkov saw engineering schematics. Each person received knowledge tailored to their understanding and needs. But Miller was focused on something more important. He gathered his leadership team for a strategy session. "We have 14 months before the fleet arrives," he began. "Enough time to establish solid communication protocols with our visitors. Enough time to demonstrate that first contact can be peaceful. And enough time for Mission Control to get increasingly nervous about our silence," Volkov pointed out. "Eventually they'll realize we're ignoring them. Then we don't ignore them completely." Miller smiled. "We send reports, carefully edited. We focus on the scientific aspect. Discoveries about warp physics, new materials, mathematical advancements. Things that make this look like an opportunity, not a threat." Chen frowned. "You're manipulating the narrative." "I'm controlling the panic. There's a difference." Miller brought up a communications diagram. "Mission Control will receive what we send. The military fleet will receive orders based on these reports. If we shape their perception now, we control their response later. And when they arrive and see that we omitted how advanced these aliens really are, by then we'll have months of documented peaceful interaction, concrete evidence that we can coexist." Miller looked at each of them. "Fear comes from uncertainty. We take uncertainty out of the equation." "That's presumptuous," Nakamura said calmly, "to assume we know better than Earth's entire command structure." "I don't assume I know better. I assume I'm closer. I have context they don't. And I'm going to use that context to give humanity a chance to make the right choice." There was a long silence. Finally, Volkov sighed. "You know you're basically committing insubordination on a historical scale, right? I prefer to think of it as exercising local judgment under extraordinary circumstances. Call it what you want. It's still going to end in a court-martial." Miller smiled. "Only if I'm wrong. If I'm right, I'll be too busy being a first contact hero to worry about paperwork." Chen rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "All right, I'll make the scientific reports sound as unterrifying as possible. But if this blows up in our faces, you take all the blame?" "Agreed." They worked through the night, carefully constructing a narrative of discovery and cooperation. The reports were technically true, just strategically incomplete. Yes, they had found alien technology. Yes, it was advanced. No, it did not demonstrate hostile intent. Yes, they were learning. Yes, it was controlled. When the first report was transmitted to Earth, Miller felt as if he had shot an arrow into the dark, hoping it would hit something vital without causing collateral damage. 13 months and 28 days until the fleet's arrival. Enough time to build understanding, or enough time to make the mistake that would end humanity before it truly began its journey among the stars. Miller looked out the window at the alien ship, silent and patient in its orbit. "We won't disappoint you," he murmured. "Or at least, we'll die trying not to disappoint." Behind him, Aurora 7 hummed with activity. 42 people, working tirelessly to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. It was a beginning. 6 months passed at a pace that alternated between tediously slow and terrifyingly fast. Aurora 7 had transformed from a research station into something entirely new, an informal embassy between humanity and the cosmos. The alien box, which the team had begun to simply call the Archive, became the center of a silent revolution. Each day brought new discoveries, new insights, new ways of seeing the universe that challenged centuries of human assumptions. Dr. Chen had spent countless hours interfacing with the Archive, emerging each time with equations that rewrote fundamental physics. "It's not that our science was wrong," she explained during one of the collective debriefing sessions. "It's that it was incomplete, like trying to describe a sphere using only two-dimensional geometry." On the main screen, she projected a series of diagrams that made Miller's brain ache just looking at them. Light speed isn't an absolute limit, it's a dimensional limit. The Archive shows how to access extra dimensions where different rules apply. That's why their ship can travel without conventional propulsion. "Are you saying you can replicate that?" Volkov asked, his voice mixing hope and disbelief. "Not in the next 50 years, maybe not in the next 500. Chen turned off the projection. "The knowledge is there, but our material technology is centuries behind. It's like giving the design of a quantum computer to someone in the Bronze Age. They might understand the concept, but they don't have the tools to build the tools to build the tools." "Then why show us?" Miller asked. "To prove it's possible, to give direction to our development." She smiled faintly, "And perhaps to humble us a little, remind us how young we are." Nakamura had had his own revelations. His sessions with the Archive focused on biology and galactic ecology. "There are 14 basic types of biochemistry the collective has encountered," he reported, his eyes shining with fascination. "Earth uses only one, but all follow similar principles: self-replication, energy consumption, adaptation. Life is not a statistical accident, it is mathematical inevitability under certain conditions." "How many intelligent species are there, really?" Miller asked. 3,400,000 in the collective, as the ambassador said. "But the Archive suggests there could be 10 times that number who never achieved interstellar space, and an unknown number who did but chose not to join." Nakamura paused. "The galaxy is more populated than we ever imagined, and more dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "The Archive has an entire section on extinct species, civilizations that destroyed themselves, some through war, others through ecological neglect, some," he hesitated, "some through mismanaged transcendence." "Transcendence?" "Consciousness upload to digital substrates, radical genetic modification, fusion with artificial intelligence. The Archive calls it the singularity point. When a species develops the ability to fundamentally redesign its own nature." Nakamura looked around the room. "Of the species that reach that point, 63% do not survive with their civilization intact." A somber silence fell upon the group. Miller broke it eventually. "So they're not just testing us on how we deal with them. They're evaluating if we'll survive our own progress." "Exactly." Meanwhile, the carefully constructed reports continued to flow to Earth. Miller and Chen had developed an efficient system, include genuine scientific discoveries, but frame them in terms that minimized how radically different the aliens truly were. Make it sound like gradual advancement rather than complete revolution. Mission Control's responses were predictable. Excitement about scientific discoveries, concern about security protocols, increasing pressure to allow direct oversight once the fleet arrived. But there was also something else. Miller began to notice subtle shifts in the tone of the transmissions, fewer direct orders, more questions, as if Mission Control was beginning to realize that the situation at Kepler 442 was beyond their procedure manuals. "They're giving us rope," Volkov observed after reading the latest transmission. "They can't control us from 350 light-years away, so they're pretending they always wanted us to have autonomy." "Works for us," Miller replied, "as long as we don't hang ourselves with it." The real challenge came in the 8th month. A second alien ship appeared in the system, alarms blared at 0322, and this time, Miller was prepared. He arrived at the ops center while the crew was still converging, his clothes improvised and eyes heavy with sleep. "Report," he ordered. Chen was pale. "New contact. Emerged from a warp point approximately 2 astronomical units away. Completely different signature from the first ship." "Different how?" "Bigger, much bigger, and it's not making any attempt at communication." The central hologram showed the newcomer. Where the first ship was elegant and geometrically impossible, this one was brutal. A massive structure of aggressive angles and surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It had the aesthetic sensibility of a warhammer. "Is the first ship reacting?" Miller asked. "Yes." It moved into a position between us and the newcomer. Clear defensive posture. Miller felt ice form in his stomach. "They're protecting us." "Or they're protecting the archive," Volkov suggested grimly. "We don't know what the second ship wants." For the next 40 minutes, the 2 alien ships remained in silent confrontation. Aurora 7 watched, helpless and terrified, as forces beyond its comprehension assessed each other across the vacuum. Then, the second ship transmitted, not to Aurora 7, to the first ship. And although the humans couldn't decode the transmission, its intent was crystal clear through pure trajectory mathematics and energy vectors. It was an ultimatum. "The first ship is responding," Chen reported. "Transmission on multiple frequencies, including some directed at us." "Can you translate?" "The archive it's glowing. I think it's providing context." Chen touched the box hesitantly, then gasped. "Commander, the second ship is a dissident faction. They disagree with the collective's recruitment policy." "Disagree how?" "They think young species like us are dangerous, that we should be contained, not uplifted. They came to prevent our contact." Miller felt anger burn through the fear. "So we spend 6 months proving we're worthy, and now someone decides it doesn't matter." "That's not how it works," Nakamura interjected, his own hand on the archive. "The collective isn't uniform, it's democratic. Disagreement is allowed, even encouraged, but—" He hesitated. "But unauthorized actions against potential members are prohibited. The second ship is violating protocol." "So what happens now? Do they fight?" As if in response, both ships lit up simultaneously. Not with weapons, Miller realized, but with something more fundamental. The very space around them began to distort, waves of gravitational energy tearing through the vacuum. "They're preparing for space-time warp combat," Chen whispered with awe and terror. "They're going to fight in extra dimensions." "Will that affect us?" "I don't know. The physics involved is beyond any model we have." Miller made a decision. "Open transmission, all frequencies. I want to talk to both ships." "Commander, we don't know if—" Now, Dr. Chen. She opened the channel with trembling fingers. Miller took a deep breath and began to speak, knowing that every word could be the difference between diplomacy and disaster. Attention, alien ships. This is Commander John Miller of Aurora 7 Station, representing humanity. We recognize that there is disagreement about our suitability for contact. We respect that different perspectives exist. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But we ask that you resolve this disagreement without violent conflict. Not because we have a right to ask, but because we believe any advanced civilization should have better methods of resolution than war. Silence. The ships remained in confrontation, energy building. Miller continued, his voice firm. If you disagree about our worth, then test us. Challenge us. Make us prove we deserve consideration. But do not destroy each other for our sake. If we are not worthy, then surely we are not worthy of causing conflict among you. More silence. Then, suddenly, the spatial distortions began to subside. The second ship transmitted. This time, the archive translated immediately, projecting symbols that formed into words in Miller's mind. Interesting perspective, young species. You acknowledge your own insignificance and yet ask for intervention on our behalf. Is this humility or arrogance? Miller smiled slightly. Both, probably. We are humans. Contradiction is our specialty. There was what might have been the alien equivalent of a chuckle. Perhaps there is value in you after all. Very well. There will be no conflict today. But I will remain in system to observe. If your species proves itself unworthy, I will take appropriate action. The second ship began to move away, shifting to a more distant orbit. The first ship sent its own message, laden with what Miller interpreted as something between relief and approval. Well done, Commander. You demonstrated pragmatic wisdom. To recognize when others have power over your destiny and yet maintain dignity. That is a valuable quality. When the crisis passed and the alert systems silenced, Miller found himself trembling. Chen floated to him, her expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. You just meddled in a conflict between species that could destroy us with a thought, she said. That was either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily stupid. Perhaps both, Miller echoed his own reply. But it worked. This time. What about next time? Next time, maybe we'll be a little less primitive, a little more prepared. He looked at the archive, glowing softly in its containment. They don't expect perfection. They expect progress. As long as we keep learning, we keep proving our worth. Volkov approached, his expression unusually respectful. You know, you probably started a new section in the archive about us? Species that interfere in conflicts they understand nothing about. I prefer species that attempt diplomacy even when outmatched. Sounds better. The incident with the second ship changed the dynamic on Aurora 7. They were no longer just passive observers, learning from benevolent aliens. They were active participants in galactic politics, whether they liked it or not. Transmissions to Earth became more urgent. Miller could no longer completely mask the complexity of the situation. Mission Control needed to understand that when the fleet arrived, they would be entering a diplomatically delicate situation involving multiple alien factions. Earth's response was predictable, controlled panic, and demands for immediate evacuation. Miller ignored both. 7 months, he told his leadership team, During the debriefing, after receiving the latest round of transmissions, in 7 months, 6 military ships from Earth will arrive here, expecting to rescue us from a hostile situation. And they'll find a research station actively participating in first contact with not one, but 2 alien factions. It's going to be a shock, Chen agreed. It's going to be a disaster if we don't prepare them properly. Miller brought up a communications timeline. Every transmission from here on needs to educate, needs to shape expectations. When this fleet arrives, every commander on those ships needs to understand that shooting first is not an option. What if they don't listen? Nakamura asked calmly. Then we fail the test, and humanity loses its chance to join the cosmos. Miller met the eyes of every person in the room. We're not going to let that happen. The next 7 months would be the most critical in human history, not because aliens were in orbit around Kepler 442, but because humans were arriving. And humans, as Miller well knew, were unpredictable, especially when scared, especially when armed, especially when confronted with everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe being rewritten in front of them. We're going to make this work, he said, with more confidence than he felt, because the alternative is unthinkable. But as he looked at the 2 alien ships suspended in the vacuum, one benevolent and one still deciding, Miller couldn't completely suppress the thought. What if humanity simply wasn't ready? The countdown had reached 3 days, 72 hours, until Earth's fleet emerged into the Kepler 442 system, and all of Miller's carefully constructed diplomacy was tested by the most unpredictable element in the universe: scared human military personnel. Aurora 7 had changed drastically in the 13 months since first contact. The station, that had been home to 42 scientists, now hosted something entirely different. 3 crew members had become specialized translators, capable of interfacing with the archive for hours without disorientation. 5 had developed enough understanding of extra-dimensional physics to begin designing experiments, and all, absolutely all, had absorbed a fundamental truth. Humanity was extraordinarily young, but not without value. Alien ship status? Miller asked during the morning briefing. Chen checked her readings. Ship 1 remains in parallel orbit. Ship 2 is in a more distant position, but its sensors are actively scanning both us and Ship 1. And she hesitated. We've detected 3 other gravitational signatures in the outer system. 3? Miller straightened up. Since when? They appeared overnight. Very subtle. If we weren't specifically looking for warp distortions, we would have missed them completely. Nakamura studied the projected data. Observers, more factions of the collective wanting to witness what happens when humans meet humans under alien gaze. Wonderful. So we've turned this into a galactic spectacle. Miller rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. How many civilizations are watching us make fools of ourselves? At least 5 confirmed, possibly dozens undetected. Chen tried to sound encouraging. But think positively. If we succeed, we'll have an audience to witness it. And if we fail, we'll have an audience for our funeral. The plan was simple in theory, terrifyingly complex in execution. When the fleet emerged, Aurora 7 would immediately transmit a comprehensive data package. Not just scientific reports, but full context. The nature of the collective, the presence of multiple factions, the ongoing assessment, and the critical importance of taking no aggressive action. "It's going to work," Volkov said for the 10th time that day, as if repetition could make it true. The fleet commanders are professionals. They'll assess the situation before acting. Professionals trained to protect humanity from existential threats, Miller countered. And from their perspective, 5 alien ships of unknown capability orbiting a human station looks exactly like an existential threat. Then we need to recontextualize quickly, in minutes, before someone makes an irreversible decision. The second day brought an unexpected complication. Ship 1 transmitted a direct request. They want a human representative to come. "Aboard," Chen translated, her voice trembling slightly. "A face-to-face meeting before the fleet arrives." Silence fell over the ops center. 14 months of remote communication, and now, 72 hours from the most critical moment, the aliens wanted a face-to-face meeting. "Is it a trap?" Volkov asked, vocalizing what everyone was thinking. "I don't think so." Nakamura was interfacing with the archive. "The ambassador is explaining. They want to establish, the closest word would be personal testimony, so that when your authorities arrive, they can confirm that direct contact occurred and was successful. They want to give us credibility," Miller realized. If someone from Aurora 7 can say, "I've been on an alien ship and came back safe and sound," it carries more weight than any transmission. "It's also a huge risk," Chen pointed out. "If something goes wrong, if there's a misunderstanding, if their physiology is incompatible with ours in ways we don't foresee." "So who's going?" Volkov asked. Everyone looked at Miller. He sighed. "Of course, the commander always sacrifices himself first." "You don't have to," Chen began. "Yes, I do. It's my responsibility, and frankly, I'm the most dispensable. You all have real scientific knowledge, I just have marginally functional charisma and a willingness to make stupid decisions." "You're not selling the mission well," Volkov murmured. Miller smiled despite the tension. "When I get back, you can remind me how brave I was, or how stupid, depending on the outcome." 6 hours later, Miller floated in a transfer pod directed at Ship 1. His spacesuit had been modified with extra sensors at Chen's insistence, monitoring everything from his heart rate to radiation exposure. If something killed him, at least they'd die knowing what. Comforting thought. Ship 1 grew in the observation window, its impossible geometry becoming more pronounced the closer he got. Part of his brain insisted that what he was seeing couldn't exist in normal 3-dimensional space. Another part had already accepted that normal 3-dimensional space was just a slice of a much more complex reality. The pod docked with surprising gentleness. A hatch opened on the alien ship's surface, revealing an interior illuminated by that light which never had an adequate name in human language. Miller took a deep breath, checked his suit seal one last time, and stepped through. The interior defied description. There were no walls in the traditional sense, just transitions between spaces that folded in on themselves in ways that made his eyes ache. Gravity existed, but it came from multiple directions simultaneously, somehow cancelling out in perfect equilibrium that left him floating. And there, in what could be considered the chamber's center, stood the ambassador. This time it had a more defined form. Still not completely physical, but less conceptual than during the interface via the archive. It was humanoid enough not to be completely alien, but different enough to be clearly something else. Skin that seemed more crystalline than organic, refracting light in patterns that suggested internal complexity. 4 eyes, arranged in a pattern that allowed 360-degree vision. Limbs that split into more joints than human anatomy could accommodate. Commander Miller. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Thank you for coming. I know this requires considerable courage. Miller found his voice. Thank you for not dissolving me into component atoms. What could have been laughter reverberated through the chamber. Your humor remains intact. That is good. You will need it in the coming hours. That's not exactly reassuring. The ambassador gestured, and a projection appeared. It showed 6 points of light approaching the system, the human fleet. Your authorities arrive with loaded weapons and expectations of danger. This is understandable, but problematic. I can explain the situation. Make them understand there's no threat. You can try, but understand, Commander, what is truly at stake here. The projection changed, now showing countless star systems. The collective already has 3,400,000 members. We do not need humanity. You join us because it is beneficial for you, not for us. Then why all this effort? Why test and evaluate and risk internal conflict? Because each species, we admit, enriches the collective in ways that cannot be predicted. Humans have a unique perspective, resilience born of fragility, creativity forged in limitation, hope despite logic suggesting despair. The ambassador moved closer, its multiple eyes focusing intensely. These qualities are rare, valuable, but only if they can be preserved as you evolve. And if they cannot, then you become just another spacefaring species, capable, perhaps even advanced, but not unique, not special. The projection showed Earth, with all its political divisions highlighted. Your greatest challenge is not technology or scientific understanding, it is unity. You remain tribal, divided by geography and ideology and economics. We're working on it. For 10,000 years, with minimal progress. The ambassador didn't sound critical, just factual. Most species resolve this before achieving interstellar travel, or they destroy themselves trying. You have somehow managed to reach the stars still fragmented. It is remarkable and precarious. Miller felt the weight of those words. So when the fleet arrives, you're not just evaluating how we deal with you, you're evaluating how we deal with each other. Exactly. If your military listens to diplomats, if commanders respect scientists, if authorities accept evidence over fear, these internal dynamics say more about your maturity than any external test we could create. No pressure, then. Plenty of pressure, actually. But pressure either forges or breaks. We shall see which applies to humanity. They talked for another 2 hours. The ambassador shared stories of other species that had faced similar moments. Some had triumphed, uniting in the face of the cosmos. Others had failed spectacularly, their internal divisions amplifying into civilizational collapse. There are patterns, the ambassador explained. Species that prioritize the collective over the individual tend to unite easily but lose creativity. Species that prioritize the individual over the collective struggle with coordination but innovate rapidly. Humans are unusual for valuing both simultaneously. This creates tension, but also possibility. Possibility of what? Of synthesis. Of finding a balance that other species lost. If you can. The ambassador paused. Which brings me to the true purpose of this meeting. An opening appeared in the impossible wall, revealing an object suspended in an energy field. It was crystalline, approximately the size of a human fist, and glowed with an internal light that pulsed at a rhythm that somehow matched Miller's heartbeat. "This is a direct communication device," the ambassador explained. "It will allow you to speak with me instantly when your fleet arrives. No transmission, delay, no misunderstandings. If the situation escalates, you can intervene immediately." Miller looked at the crystal, slow comprehension sinking in. "You're making me a mediator. We are giving you the tools to succeed. What you do with them is your choice." Miller reached for the crystal hesitantly. The moment his fingers touched the surface, he felt a connection establish, an almost imperceptible thread linking his consciousness to the vast network of the collective. "This..." He paused, lacking words. "This is trust. It is an investment and hope." The ambassador led him back towards the hatch. "Commander Miller, in the coming hours, you will face challenges no human has faced before. You will be questioned, doubted, perhaps even accused of treason by those who do not understand. But remember, you are not alone. Aurora 7 is not alone, and humanity, despite all its flaws, is not alone." Miller held the crystal firmly as he returned to the transfer pod. Through the observation window, he could see Aurora 7, a fragile spark of human light, suspended in the vacuum. And beyond it, the stars. Billions of them, countless worlds. Infinite possibility. Humanity was about to take its place in that cosmos, or it was about to prove it wasn't ready. In 24 hours, they would know which. The fleet emerged from warp space at 1447 UTC like a wound tearing the fabric of reality. 6 Vanguard-class military ships, each carrying enough weaponry to vitrify an entire continent. They appeared in combat formation, shields already active, weapon systems energized. Miller watched from Aurora 7's command bridge, the alien crystal hanging on a cord around his neck. He could feel the ambassador's presence through the connection, a quiet consciousness waiting at the edges of his perception. "Transmitting data package now," Jen announced, her fingers flying over the controls, including greeting protocols and explicit instructions not to take hostile actions. "Time until they receive it?" Miller asked. 7 seconds of light speed delay. Another 15 seconds to process if they're efficient. 22 seconds. An eternity when 6 warships were deciding if you were an ally or a threat. The response came faster than they expected. The lead ship, the UES Wellington, transmitted on an open channel. "Aurora 7, this is Admiral Catherine Zhao, commander of the Expeditionary Force. We confirm receipt of your package. Crew status?" Miller activated the transmitter. "Admiral Zhao, this is Commander Miller. All crew are healthy and safe. The situation is stable, but delicate. I request you keep weapons in passive mode while we conduct a full briefing." There was a pause. When Zhao responded, her voice carried controlled tension. "Commander, we detect 5 unidentified contacts in the system. I presume these are your alien ships. I require confirmation that you are not under duress." Miller had anticipated this. "Admiral, I will transmit a personal authentication code followed by a verification phrase that only you and I know from our pre-mission briefing." He paused, remembering. "The beer on Mars is terrible, but the company is worth the price." Zhao had shared that opinion with him 3 years ago during a conference on Olympus Mons. No one else would know that. Another pause. Authentication confirmed. All right, Miller. You have our attention. Explain the situation. For the next 40 minutes, Miller outlined everything. The initial approach, the communication attempts, the contact via the archive, the second dissident ship, the other observing factions, and, crucially, the nature of the test humanity was unknowingly facing. "So let me see if I understand," Zhao finally said, her voice cautiously neutral. "There's a galactic community of millions of species. They're deciding whether to accept us as junior members. And this whole situation is basically an entrance exam to see if we're civilized enough to play with the adults." That's an extreme simplification, but essentially yes. "And the second ship, the dissident one, does it still pose a threat?" Miller looked at the sensors. Ship 2 remained in its distant orbit, observing. They disagree with the policy of including young species, but so far they've respected the process, as long as we don't give them reason to prove their point. Reason like showing up with 6 warships? Reason like using those warships aggressively against targets that haven't demonstrated hostility? Silence on the line. Miller could imagine the conversation happening on the Wellington's bridge. Officers debating, analyzing data, assessing risks. Admiral Zhao had a reputation for being a strategic thinker, not a reactionary. But she also had orders from Earth Command. Orders that likely emphasized caution and preparation for the worst-case scenario. "Commander Miller," Zhao finally spoke, "I appreciate the comprehensive briefing, but you must understand my position. I have 6 ships under my command and thousands of lives under my responsibility. I cannot simply lower defenses based on your assessment of the situation, no matter how trustworthy you are." "I'm not asking you to lower defenses, Admiral. I'm asking you not to initiate hostilities. There's a difference. A difference that could cost us everything if your assessment is wrong." Miller felt the crystal warm against his chest. The ambassador was paying attention. "Admiral, I can arrange direct communication between you and the collective's representatives. Allow you to assess for yourself." "Communication how?" "Through a device they provided me. It allows instant transmission without light-speed delay." Another long silence. "That's technologically impossible." "It was impossible before we discovered we were wrong about fundamental physics. Admiral, the aliens have technology centuries beyond ours. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done so already. The fact that they haven't should tell you something." "It says they want something from us, not necessarily that their intentions are benevolent." Miller recognized the impasse forming. Zhao was a professional skeptic, trained to assess threats and protect humanity. All the rules in her manual said to keep distance, assess carefully, prepare for the worst. But the rules had been written for a different universe, a universe where humanity was alone. "Admiral," Miller began carefully, "what they want from us isn't resources or territory. It's proof that we can evolve beyond our tribal nature, that we can look at the unknown and choose understanding instead of violence." "Beautiful philosophy, Commander, but I have to deal with practical reality." "The practical reality is that there are at least 5 alien civilizations watching right now to see if we shoot the messenger. And if we shoot, we prove them right to fear us." Before Zhao could respond, Chen interrupted urgently. "Commander, Ship 2 is moving, approaching on our vector." Miller felt his stomach clench. "Speed?" "Moderate. It's not a full-speed attack, but definitely deliberate." Through the crystal connection, Miller felt the ambassador's presence. The dissident faction is forcing the situation. They want to see how your military reacts to the perception of threat. It's another test, Miller realized aloud. What's another test? Zhao demanded. Ship 2 is moving to pressure us. They want to see if your fleet opens fire, reflexively. If it's coming on an attack trajectory, it's not an attack, it's theater. They're testing our ability to distinguish between real threat and posturing. Miller took a deep breath. Admiral, this is the moment. If your fleet opens fire now, we prove we're impulsive, that we can't be trusted with advanced technology, and we lose our chance to join the collective. And what if you're wrong? What if it's a real attack? Then we'll die knowing we tried diplomacy. But Admiral, please, look at the data. Ship 2 hasn't energized weapons systems. It's not accelerating to combat speed. It's just moving closer. He could hear rising tension across the communication line, orders being shouted, weapon systems being prepared, the Wellington and its sister ships taking defensive positions. Commander Miller, Zhao said, her voice taut as a wire, if this ship gives any indication of hostile intent, I will defend this station and my fleet. That is not negotiable. I understand. I just ask that you give me a chance to communicate first. Miller didn't wait for permission. He grasped the crystal, focused his will through the connection. Ambassador, I need your help. Now. The response was immediate. What do you need? Open channel to all ships in the system, human and alien. I want everyone to hear this. Granted. Miller felt the connection expand, his consciousness suddenly linked to multiple receivers. He could feel the presence of Zhao and her officers. He could feel the ambassador and the observers. And he could feel the cold curiosity of Ship 2. He began to speak, his voice carried by technology that defied human comprehension. Attention all ships, this is Commander John Miller, representative of Aurora 7 Station, and at this moment, spokesperson for humanity. I recognize there is tension. I recognize there is fear. Both sides are assessing threats and preparing defenses. This is natural instinct, survival instinct. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But survival isn't just about avoiding destruction. It's about growth, evolution, becoming something more than we were. And at this moment, humanity faces a choice that defines who we will become. Through the connection, he could feel attention focused on him, everyone waiting. To Ship 2 and to those who doubt us, you are right that we are young, right that we are primitive, right that we make mistakes. But being right about our flaws does not mean being right about our potential. Yes, we are tribal. Yes, we are violent. Yes, we fight among ourselves. But we also learn. We grow. We change. He could see Chen and Volkov watching, their faces a mix of awe and terror. To the human fleet, I know your instincts say to shoot, to protect, to not risk. Those instincts have kept us alive for millions of years. But those same instincts will also prevent us from reaching our potential if we don't learn when to temper them. Trust is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to move forward despite fear. Ship 2 was closer now. The human fleet had locked weapons, awaiting fire orders. And to the observers, to the countless civilizations watching this moment, you have seen countless species face this test. You have seen many fail. But every failure taught something. And those teachings led to us, to this moment, where humanity finally has a chance to prove that we learn not only from our own mistakes, but from yours too. Miller looked through the observation window at the ships suspended in the vacuum, human and alien, separated by technology and biology and millions of years of evolution, but connected in this singular moment. So here is my choice, my decision as a representative of my species in this historic moment. He took a deep breath. I trust that Ship 2 is not attacking, but testing. I trust that our alien allies are genuine, and I trust that my own species is capable of seeing beyond immediate fear to a greater possibility. Absolute silence on the line. Admiral Zhao, I am ordering, as commander of this station, and as the one with the most context regarding this situation, that you keep weapons in passive mode. I am not asking you to lower defenses, just that you do not shoot first. Commander Miller, Zhao's voice was carefully controlled. You do not have the authority to give orders to a military fleet. Then it's not an order. It's a request, from one human to another, from someone who has spent 14 months learning about the universe to someone who has just arrived. Please, Admiral, trust me. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Ship 2 continued its approach. Human weapons remained locked. The entire system seemed to hold its breath. Then Zhao spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. All ships maintain defensive posture. Do not fire unless fired upon. Repeat, do not fire unless fired upon. Miller felt a wave of relief, so intense he had to grip the console. Through the crystal connection, he felt the ambassador's approval. And something more. Respect. Ship 2 approached until it was just 1,000 kilometers from Aurora 7. And then it simply stopped. A transmission came, translated through the archive. Impressive. Your species demonstrated restraint in the face of perceived threat. Your military leadership followed the counsel of a scientific representative. These are qualities lacking in many more advanced species. The voice changed, becoming less hostile. Perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps there is value in allowing young species to join the collective before they lose their essential humanity. A pause. We withdraw our objection. Humanity deserves a chance to prove its worth. The tension in the system evaporated like mist under a morning sun. Miller felt his knees almost give out. But the ambassador still had more to say. Through the crystal connection, its voice reached everyone present.